What's up guys, this is Heat. I wanted to do a build video on the last build that I used in the Tempest League, which is a sword Reave ranger that I call the Alchemist. This was a very experimental build. I just kind of wanted to test Reave, and I also wanted to test pots and their buffs from the tree to see how effective and how good pots would be with all the buffs from the tree, or a lot of buffs from the tree. So that being said, this isn't going to be a typical build guide that I normally do. It's not going to be as in-depth. You're going to get more of an overview on the build than something very nuanced. Mechanically, Reave gives you 4 stacks maximum, and each stack on Reave increases the AoE of your Reave. However, if you use Vaal Reave, it surpasses this threshold up to 8, and as long as you're hitting stuff, you can maintain this 8 stacks throughout an entire run of a map or whatever zone that you're in. So essentially, you can have 8 stacks all the time instead of just 4. Another interesting mechanic of Reave that you have to keep in mind when you play it is, even if you shift click with Reave, it tends to alternate attacking targets. So it kind of has a will of its own. So that being said, positioning is very important, because you want to position yourself in a way where if Reave alternates to a target that you don't want to hit, it's still hitting all the targets in front of you. So you're always thinking about how to maximize your DPS in an AoE sense. Since this was an experimental build for single target, I wanted to experiment with Vaal Double Strike, which I find to be absolutely crazy. It does a lot of damage, and it's best used if you buff yourself up and then actually cast it, because it retains the buffs that you have. Like for example, if you're using Atziri's Promise, it'll also have Atziri's Promise when your clone is summoned. I use Whirling Blades for movement, which is very important, and because it allows me to not use a Quicksilver Flask and use another Flask that is very DPS or defense orientated. Whirling Blades is also used defensively here because I have Fortify, so on hit it'll proc Fortify, which is another layer of defense. One other defensive mechanic that I do have is Enduring Cry, which gives you endurance charges, and then I also have Immortal cast on damage taken with Immortal Call. To generate frenzy charges for more DPS, this build uses Blood Rage, which is pretty a standard way of generating frenzy charges, but it also helps with Life Leech, which is important for this build and for survivability. In terms of DPS, if you're using both a Taste of Hate and Atziri's Promise at the same time with 5 max frenzy charges, which this build has, you're looking around 33,000 DPS if you're holding around a 300 DPS one-handed sword. Without any Flask buffs, you're probably looking around 24,000 DPS. Now the footage that you're seeing here is post-rip, because I did rip on this build. I wanted to also test it with Atziri, and I ended up ripping at Atziri. However, I did get to Atziri herself, so I did a double Vaal, which was pretty easy. Then I also did the 3 bosses, which were a little bit difficult, but I was able to tank them because of my flasks, so it wasn't too bad. And then I just misplayed Atziri because I don't do that fight often, and I happened to rip. The other thing this build takes advantage of is a lot of Flask buffs from the tree, and therefore I wanted to use Flasks that were really strong, like Taste of Hate, Rumi's Concoction, and Atziri's Promise, because they're all buffed in their own way for DPS and survivability. For example, Atziri's Promise gives you survivability, and also Rumi's Concoction gives you survivability. In terms of gear, you want a sword that's around 300 DPS, preferably at minimum 250 and above. And then everything else is pretty standard. You want physical damage on your jewelry for increased damage. You want life and resistances. And then on a belt, maybe you want something like increase Flask duration to further increase all the buffs that you have on the tree as well. And then lastly, you probably want some sort of mana or life leech, which in this case I had both on the gloves that this character was wearing. You can also get it from the tree and from jewels. I will post in the description a link to this tree and also a link to my gear so you can take a look at your own leisure. But the skill tree is pretty straightforward and there's nothing too complicated here. It has 4 jewel slots, then it has a lot of passives that increase Flask buffs like you just saw there, Druid Rite, or for example, Herbalism. And then it has a lot of defensive passives for increasing block chance and then defenses while holding the shield. So I try to evenly balance it out in terms of DPS and defense. The health wheel circle by the sign is pretty important. That's where the majority of your health comes from because the ranger's tree is pretty limited in my opinion in terms of health. So you need to make your way over there and grab that health wheel. A pretty short build video, more of an overview. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.